panel discussion, Mr. Fortov, the President of Russian Academy of Science, Mr. Grigoriev, the Chief Executive Officer of Foundation for Advanced Research, Mr. Klepich, the Vice Chairman of and Chief Economist of Vnesheconom Bank, Mr. Lapidus, the Senior Advisor of the President of Russian Railways Company, and please welcome our foreign guests who agreed to participate in our panel discussion. So this is Mr. Loyola from Brazil and Madame Panto from Republic of South Africa. So I suggest that the format will be, as usual, we'll just give the floor to each of the participants. If somebody has questions, please wait till the end of the speech, and after the speech finishes, you will have time for questions and answers. At the end, I guess the last speech will be by Minister Livanov, who will have question and answer session. He's a little bit late, unfortunately, but we decided to start without him. So I repeat, after Minister's speech, we'll have enough time to ask some questions and we'll conclude. So I give the floor to first speech by Mr. Fortov. Thank you very much and for giving me the floor. I'm very grateful to participate in this forum. And it's a wonderful opportunity for me to share some ideas that I have on the topic. If we have a look at innovations from the perspective of fundamental sciences, I'm sure that there is no need to explain you how important fundamental sciences are for innovations and for general humanity progress. If we analyze the current situation, we will understand that every new technology or any old technology that it's under some new development, all of them are based on some new scientific developments. At the same time, the speed of the innovational processes development and the speed of getting some scientific knowledge and achieving some new successes, also the progress of understanding of the universe, it is all interconnected and it all influences each other. I just wanted to tell you that till the very recent times, the fundamental science was mostly used as a way of explaining some natural processes that happened independently from humanity. Burning, electromagnetic processes, those were natural processes that happened regardless the existence of the human being. And only later we created the whole systems of explanations. The situation changed drastically about 50 or 60 years ago only. And today, we found ourselves in a different situation. The science shows us some different occurrence that we haven't seen before, like radioactivity. It's a classical example. Radioactivity and, as a consequence, nuclear energy and so-called war energy. It's a result of pure scientific process. After the discovery of the neutron and after the decision to use this neutron to bombard the cores, so we could get heavier and heavier elements. And actually, this activity was a part of chemical sciences. No one actually thought about the application of it. And I often remember how Rutherford was saying that this is purely academic stuff that no one will ever use in practice. But our Russian academicians were actually punished by their administration. At that period of time, it was a special ministry dedicated to fundamental sciences, and they were punished and fined by doing some wrong researches. These two academicians, Zemlevich and Kharitonov, were actually fined for making this research neutral research, and they started to work on that during their free time. So the nuclear physics turns out to be the first example of obtaining something unnatural, like artificial. Second example is neutrogenic structure, the crystals that do not exist in nature, but nevertheless Mr. Alferov's work that resulted not only in Nobel Prize, but also in semi-conduct effect that we all were aware of. So we're facing so-called reorientation of fundamental researches that do not explain existing phenomenon, but they give us some new ways of using it. What is very important for us, we are facing, so-called pressure of time. We see that 90% of all for example, discoveries in physics were made during the lifetime of one generation. We are facing the fastest time compression, and we are facing the challenge of, understanding this knowledge, of processing this knowledge. We have to start processing the knowledge faster and faster, and consecutively the demands to people who are working in innovative sphere are higher and higher. This is very important, because if we stop following, the fundamental scientific sphere for just a short period of time, we'll be already late, and we will hardly catch up with all innovative progresses. Another thing is, another demand is to introduce the results of scientific researches as fast as possible into practice. There are a lot of talks about practical usage of some results of fundamental researches. And today we heard the speech at the plenary session by our Prime Minister, and he was very right to say that it's very important, the theory is very important, but even more important is how do we use the results of our researches. Unfortunately, we don't have the single one medicine for the creation of a single innovative system. That is why the forums, as this one, are very important. These platforms helps us to find the best tool, the best and the most efficient tool of using the knowledge that we have. Remember, in the year 2000, the humanity started to analyze what was the brightest research, what was the brightest achievement by the humanity. And it turned out that it was the creation of an innovative system. Imagine that about 90% of all the production and goods are made basing on innovations. Here in Russia, it's not that much. It's about 0.5%, or probably 1/3%. And for us, it's the biggest challenge ever. And there is a huge difference from American innovative system, and the American system difference from Israel's. The Israel's is really different from Japanese, for example. They are all different, and there is still a lot to be done, and we are just heading to find this most efficient innovative system that will help us to go through the whole way, from the research till the implementation, practical implementation of our findings. But we don't have much of a choice, actually, because we are behind many countries from the point of view of this realization of innovations. And of course, this makes us harder for us. It also depends a lot on circumstances that our country is living in. We have to deal with the characteristics of our countries. For example, we are very strong, our country, in raw materials. So this is probably the sphere that we have to push harder. And for example, if we work in high-tech sphere, for example, you have an opportunity to grow, like not, for example, 5 times, but in 10 times, grow the capacity and increase the capacity in 10 times higher. We have to analyze every sphere, and we have to switch the regimes, for example. And here there is a very important feature that I would like to conclude with. If we look at the scientific landscape of our country, Russian scientific landscape, we'll see that the institutes created in the past that were working on a sustainable level altogether. It was like a targeted meta-planning programs. That was the ministry system, so-called, that was very efficiently using the science itself. And it was the applied science mostly. About 80% of all the ministerial scientific work was applied science, and the fundamental sciences were about 20%. For now, after we closed down about 120 ministries, we consecutively shut down almost all the applied science. Many of the institutes became private, they became share-owned, and they changed their profile, and they stopped to be scientific institutes. And this gap, this void that we are facing, we see that the corporate science did not occupy it yet, and private science somehow is not interested in having that territory. We have to fulfill it. Our Chinese friends used this peculiarity in 100%. During the plenary session, we heard a lot about Chinese successes. During the last 15 years, they published 800 times more scientific works, and this is a very impressive results, and we could only, for example, find some similar results in Soviet period of time. Unfortunately, for now, we have nothing to show. The fact that we almost don't have applied science for now, this is a very serious danger for fundamental science. We try to use fundamental science characteristics for everything. We are as if thinking that we are still having Soviet Academy of Science, but the situation is very different right now. The fundamental science is very different from applied science. The fundamental science should have its deadlines. It should be. It should have accountability, and it's very, very different in fundamental science. There is a basic element of freedom. There is a space for discussion. There are some different, like, it's very different, and you can't use those methods in applied science. The result will be very bad, and this mixture is, to my opinion, quite dangerous. We are now facing very serious goals, and it's not about the situation that we found ourselves. It's not that innovation is very important. It's not only about it. It's essential factor of the surviving of our country, which is very important for our development. And I'm not actually talking about the military or security sector, because in that spheres we are having certain perspectives and some prerequisites for success. But I believe that for us it's very important to find our own way, our own development strategy. We have to take that applied science and apply it to the fundamental science that we're using now. Unfortunately, there is still a lot to be done, and that is what our Prime Minister was talking about.
Thank you, Vladimir, for your really informative contribution. And let me recall this very old toast, to the Soviet science. We used to drink to the Soviet science, which gives us not only the decent life and respect, but gives us the opportunity to meet and talk to smart people. I believe that the level of science is still decent in Russia, but of course there is room for improvement. If there are any questions to the speaker, don't hesitate to ask. I can't but also reply with the toast. Let's drink to the science if it helps. If drinking helps us. Thank you so much. Nevertheless, if there are any questions, don't hesitate to ask them, but introduce yourself first. So then the problems of the fundamental problems with the Soviet science started with zero tolerance to alcohol. Is that right, that at the end of 80s in 1985, when we had this zero alcohol tolerance, that's where all the problems started? I don't really know, but the only thing I want to stress is that the reality is that we had the idea to organize the Congress of the Central Committee of the Soviet authorities on scientific progress. And this Congress is a major thing to do. The decisions taken there were mandatory for the whole country. And that was an important gathering, you know. So the thing is that this Congress never happened. It never happened because people, and by the way, I talked to many stakeholders involved, many people in charge of that. There was simply no consensus among the participants. One wanted to stress pharmacy, the other sciences, medicine, other spheres of science. But the thing is that they are all integrated. So the Congress failed, and as soon as it failed, the collapse of the Soviet Union followed. I give floor to Andrei Grigoriev to talk about the advances of his fund. The fund is not aimed at commercializing, making profit from research. Its basic task is to develop new technologies, so-called breakthrough technologies, so that our country feels safe and secure in the coming 30, 40 years. And that's the foundation for our activity. So we're still thinking how to make profit out of that. According to our laws, the research conducted in our country is the intellectual property of our country, especially in the military sector when we develop new weaponry. I'd like to share some ideas or some accepted practices, best practices in terms of achieving effectiveness of the research as such, so that to minimize the costs and maximize the profit. We don't collect suggestions from the science. Quite the opposite. We come up with the suggestions. We come up with the demands, what we need and what results we have to have in the future to feel secure. So we place the order, and not just us from the fund, it's also the Academy of Science, the Ministry of Defense, and other stakeholders. They produced they placed the demand. When the fund was started in March 2013 and up to date, we have more than 1,500 proposals on research projects, and among those we selected 38. That's quite a serious selection we're conducting at the fund. It involves many stages, including primary selection by the staff of the fund, then secondary selection, including a scientific community from the dissertation council and the so-called head organization, which is most competent in this very field, in the field suggested for the research. Then we have a scientific and research council, and finally we have the sponsor council. The procedure is challenging on the one hand. On the other hand, it's objective, and thus we select best suggestions, best proposals for research. But that's not the main thing. The main thing is to implement these projects in the way to maximize gain, maximize profit. And here we base upon several principles. First, the young and ambitious team should deal with these projects. People who are striving to make the difference, who are willing to work hard to achieve results. To do that, we work with the organizations with which we signed the agreement, and we're required to establish the lab of the fund where all these people will be working. Frankly speaking, it's not always willingly accepted by our subcontractors, because of course for these projects we take most ambitious, most active people at the expense of other projects, of corresponding institutes and other facilities. Secondly, if we want to achieve serious, impressive results and be competitive on the market and start with the same conditions as our partners in other countries, we have to equip the labs at the corresponding level, at a decent European level. Thirdly, we try to make sure that the project implementation is just the beginning, so that other people could see the perspective, the space, the room for their further research, for their further work. And that's how we think for the future, the follow-up of the projects. That's how we deal with every single project. Every project is negotiated with the possible consumer, for the client, which is the state in our case, most of all. And these principles enable us to get rid of most of the problems we have and achieve certain and reliable results. Take fundamental science or practical application, practical implementation of certain, say, equipment. We make a roadmap where we specify the stages of project implementation, starting from the fund to the ministry and the factories, where we specify what the financing will be provided for the factory and how it will be further developed. Frankly speaking, I don't know any other way. We have vast experience working for the system, for the defense. We're working a lot in this field. We realize that it's quite a closed market. And we understand that people have to have precise information to trust us and believe in the future of the projects. On the other hand, the result is not enough. The result given from the research doesn't mean that we can implement it straight ahead. No. We have to test the equipment, test the results of our research in the practice. Our engineers can't implement the product without testing it and without being sure that it's effective. So here we see the gap between scientific work and what engineers and practitioners want. And our primary goal is to narrow this gap so that we can deliver from science to the practical implementation. Another aspect, we have been working a lot with the Academy of Science, with the universities, and the universities are currently being readapted to meet these demands. So we see the gap between what our universities can offer us and what the industry needs. It's still a gap there, and that's why we created a certain platform where science and potential consumers can meet, can gather and discuss the real needs on the market. We even offered the internship for university staff in the fund, where within half a year they will be collaborating with our defense personnel, with our defense staff, so that they have a clear idea of the needs and what they should focus on. One more important thing, although we are created to provide breakthrough in terms of defense and safety issues, we can't but mention one more important task, that is further conversion of our results. As the President put it, the financing of military is the highest now. But we still have to think ahead so that we have better convention, not the one we had in the 80s, in the 90s, when we produced just basic stuff for our army. We should think ahead and provide high-tech for the army and for defense needs, and start projects modern and effective that could be further implemented for the defense industry and for the safety needs. Here we talk about Arctic research, shale oil exploration, robotics, additive technologies, digital production concepts, and a number of other projects. And in implementing this, we're actively collaborating with other universities and institutions. It's challenging to answer all of the questions that may arise in regard to this issue, but if there are any, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you. For the military, for the U.S. Defense Forces, we created fireproof covers. And all the money. Thank you for these very relevant questions, but it's not the fund who decides upon the initiation of the projects. There are special government bodies responsible for that. Of course, we should improve on that. We should reduce the level of sensitivity. The sensitive information should be revealed, and the results we obtain have to be used further in the industry, although there are really few examples of their implementation for civil production. But I think the reason is different. The reason is that the industry is not that interested in efficiency improving. The industry is satisfied with the efficiency level they currently have, because the market of defense forces in Russia is quite closed. It's sort of monopoly, and to implement new achievements, we still lack incentives. Any other questions? Could you please express your point of view on the following? If we take the ideas of the Soviet past, which have been implemented and commercialized in the West, it's a big shame. Do you have this archive of ideas, this bank of ideas of the Soviet past that can be used right now and right here? Yes, we are dealing with that. These archives are not secret, they're not closed. We can take advantage of them. Although we are not happy to work in the way from bottom to top, we work in the opposite direction from top to bottom, but we take use of the ideas developed in the Soviet past, because of course many of them have never been implemented, so we work with the archive and have access to this information.
Yes, please, but use the microphone. Yes, I also have a certain question. Baltic State Technical University, St. Petersburg. You were quite right when you told that very often it turns out that what science does is not what the production requires. Who do you think is to formulate the goals for science, and how this can be organized? Because in my opinion, right now, this mechanism is broken, if it actually exists. Well, we have a certain institutions for that, institutions responsible for the development of the science in the country. These are the institutions that are responsible for the realization of the state policy in this sphere. Formally, we have basic and critical technologies that has to be developed like as a first stage in our country, but unfortunately we face the lack of the coordination between different institutions. That's why we are quite often pushing towards different directions, and like if we are pushing towards 4 different directions, we're not moving from the place, we are standing on the same place. I can't tell you about the whole country, but if we speak about the military and security sphere, Mr. Rogozin is responsible for that. Partly we are responsible for the, this formulating the goals for this sector of the science. We cooperate with the Ministry of the Development of Economy, and the minister will come and will tell you more on that. And we try to, talk with different bottom institutions to find out what is really necessary. I hope that I answered your questions. Please pass the mic to the front row. Kuklina Irina, concerning the specifics of the fund and the projects that you have already supported, the work with foreign partners in those very specific spheres, considering all the huge experience that you have, how important is cooperation with your foreign partners is for your fund? How much do you work with your foreign partners? In accordance with the legislation, we have an opportunity to cooperate with foreign partners. We have a certain item in our, legal framework. But for now, I can't say this is our first and foremost priority. For now, we have to find out and make it more clear for our own country and to work domestically more. Sergei Madamov. Is there in your fund a way to transfer the technologies for other sector, non-military sector? I will repeat myself. In accordance with the law about the fund, we transfer all our information to according federal institutions. If those federal institutions are not interested in that intellectual property, then we can move it to the free market. There is a certain mechanism for that. I will not describe it in details right now, but it exists. It all works in accordance with the legislation of Russian Federation. We make a tender, we make an auction, and just any market participant can buy this intellectual property. I would like also mention that during the realization of the project, we always try to think like for the future. The results of any intellectual property are transferred to federal institutions, but still this institution has to make a license agreement with the developer. So the developer still can use the results of his or her work, which is quite natural. And from Skolkovo, Mr. Yefimov, I practice innovation, and for me it's very important, the question of the topic of a discussion: how do we make this transition faster from fundamental science to the development of the economy? Because I still haven't got the answer to it. Everything we're talking about is very important indeed, but to use in military, in civic sphere, but we understand that it's not fast enough. And I just wanted to hear the answer. How do we make this transition faster? This is very important for me and for many people. I wish I knew the answer. If I did, the country would be in prosperity right now. I think this is a key problem, key question for us. I'm working in military, and Skolkovo, by the way, is also working on that, and you could share your experience and your knowledge with us. In military sector, I somehow, described my draft vision for you. When we can formulate and when we can see the future development of the project, if we can see the whole life cycle of the project, then we can use it as a tool to develop the economy. If it's not going directly to the archives, if we do not forget about it, if we see practical implementation, then this can be a tool for the technological development, to increasing the capacity of laboratories. Probably we have to think more on R&D. This is, in our sphere, in military sphere, it is all included in the agreement with federal institutions that are realizing the project. It's all described in legislation. Unfortunately, there is no free market here. By the way, the whole history of Soviet country is a testimony to the fact that this is the mechanism that shows best results, actually. Because we have to literally write and describe every minor step of the usage of any technology for people to understand clearly how to use it. I think this makes sense, and this is the only one approach for me that makes sense. If if people present here have some more questions, they'll have enough time to ask them during the Q&A sessions. And now I'd like to give the floor to Madam Pandor, the Minister of Science and Technology of the Republic of South Africa.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. In the area of innovation in the African continent, I think we're really getting off the starting blocks as South Africa. We're very concerned about ensuring that we are selective in terms of the focus areas that we invest in through our science and innovation system. We've decided that the areas we will focus upon are renewable energies. We're very, very concerned about climate change, are investing heavily in research in that domain. The third area is to do more work in the advanced materials field, because we found that nanotechnology is a very important area for innovation in South Africa. The fourth area is in space sciences and astronomy. We have a marvelous geographic advantage in terms of astronomy sciences and in space science, and thus are investing fairly significantly in geographic advantage areas for our researchers and our science institutions. The fifth area is that of biotechnology, particularly looking at the pharmaceutical sector, where we are drawing on research in indigenous knowledge systems, where we have rich sources for bioeconomy, which have not been exploited by scientists and scientific institutions in the country. It is our intention that we would convert our indigenous knowledge system into a modern pharmaceutical and agro-processing sector in South Africa. To do this, we must, of course, as colleagues have been saying, invest very significantly and strategically in human capital development. One of the areas in which we do have a challenge is that in South Africa we don't have enough master's and PhD graduates. Thus, we've begun a very large investment program in human capital development to train more young people as master's graduates and senior researchers at the doctoral and postdoctoral level. And I suppose my presence here in Russia is to continue the collaboration that we have with Russian institutions in order to ensure that we can produce the correct caliber of postgraduate candidates who can work in our growing national innovation systems. So we believe that international collaboration is absolutely imperative to achieve the kinds of results in research and development that we wish to pursue as South Africa. We've also begun to draw on our friends' experience in the innovation field by looking at what form of mechanism and institution we should create in order to accelerate the levels of progress in research, development, and innovation that we want to have. So we have established a technology innovation agency whose primary remit is to invest in promising research emerging from publicly funded higher education institutions, as well as to seek out promising small and medium-sized businesses that have a potential to grow into large businesses that can produce commercial products out of innovative investments that we've begun to make. A second mechanism that we've developed is we're creating research chairs. We've currently created 160. It's our intention to grow them to 500 in order to reverse the brain drain from South Africa, because we tend to train our researchers up to the postdoc level, and then we lose them to other systems. So what we've decided to do is create centers of excellence, have assured long-term funding for researchers in order to retain them in South Africa and allow them to form international linkages with assured funding for 10 to 15 years so that we don't disrupt the system but allow it to grow. This model of research chairs is one that we've mirrored from the experience of Canada, and it is working very effectively for us. And what we have begun to see is actually a brain gain in contrast to the brain drain that we had been experiencing for many years. We are also using our opportunities to have many more of our postdoctoral candidates having an international experience in universities outside South Africa, because we believe it's very important that we do have a much more heterogeneous experience among our researchers, because we believe diversity and international experience are very important. We're concerned that too many of our researchers tend to be local rather than global in thinking. Hence, we use the opportunity for international exchange as an important growth opportunity for our young people. we are very alert to the fact that many of us in the different countries in the world have chosen the same areas of investment. Most systems you go to will tell you they're going to invest in biotechnology. Many are investing in renewable energy sources. Many countries I go to tell me about solar energy. Even countries that don't have sun are investing in solar energy. And so the areas of research focus are very common across the world. And so what we think we need to do is make far better use of international partnerships, both with the private as well as the public sector. We, for example, in South Africa, we have 75% of the world's platinum. Platinum is a very important catalyst in the motor industry, but also in renewable energy sources, such as hydrogen fuel cells. So when we invest in innovation, we are looking at how we can support the platinum industry in order to grow a robust hydrogen fuel cell industry for South Africa. And we're using the model of economic development zones for platinum in order to ensure we have value addition on the African continent rather than exporting our raw product for value addition outside of our country and outside the continent. Further work is being done by us as South Africa in building links among researchers in Africa. We've realized, for example, that much more should be done in focusing on diseases that are prevalent on the African continent. You would all be aware of Ebola right now, and that the first 2 vaccines that have been tried have come from out of Africa. We want to reverse that trend of seeking solutions outside the continent and look at whether we can invest in researchers to develop solutions in the continent and use researchers and institutions in partnership with others, but have solutions developed on the African continent. So whenever we have an initiative as South Africa, we always look to have a partnership with more than one African country, because we believe we cannot have South Africa as an island of research and innovation development while the rest of Africa doesn't develop either its human resources or its institutional capacity to play a role in science. All of this has implications for the education systems of African countries. If we are to produce young people who are innovative, who are analytical, who are problem solvers, who seek out new ways of doing things, who look out for new materials, it means that the function and character of our universities has to be substantially different from what we have today. So we have to look at how our universities respond to the new challenge of building a human capacity that is critically enabled to be innovative and to think in a different way about how it responds to the challenges of a society. So the educational aspect and the need to rethink the educational academy are very important areas for us. We also need to pay far more attention in education to multidisciplinarity. Too many of our researchers are trained in a specialist area and tend to be very narrow in terms of how they carry out their research focus area. For example, in nanotechnology, many of our colleagues in nanohealth will focus on the nano product for health rather than the ethical use of the product. Thus, the importance of ethics in the field of nanoscience has become an imperative area to address. Hence, the important need for associating science with other science areas of study, such as the humanities and the social sciences. We found in particular that multidisciplinarity is very, very important when you're dealing, especially in the clinical research domain of science. And I am very keen in my country to always look at the composition of our research teams and whether they're paying attention to the wide spectrum of disciplines that should be brought into play if you are to have a truly innovative society. We also are finding that technology is becoming more and more important, especially at the basic education level. That if we do not use technology for improving performance in mathematics or in physical sciences, we won't get the results that we want. Hence, the link between technology and education has become a very important one for us to look at. So as our scientists develop new products, we're also asking them, could you look at whether we develop a tablet that can be utilized to present a full curriculum to young people, and that would allow them to interface with their tutors in a very different way than the manner in which they think of technology today. And one of the key technological instruments on the African continent has been the arrival of mobile technology. It offers a great deal of hope in terms of changing the way we think of the curriculum and the way we imagine learning, both in school as well as in the post-school sector. So I think there are three areas in conclusion that I would want to conclude with. The first is, when we think about education, we need to think beyond the discipline. We need a holistic framework of education, one that allows us to build the skills to use technology, that allows us to introduce globalization and the growth of the world into one global village, and one that allows young people to be constant thinkers about how they create a new world and how they play a role in problem solving. Secondly, I think we need to focus much more on learning and how young people learn. If we focus only on delivery of a curriculum and have a poor understanding of how people learn, then whatever we do in the education system will be inadequate. We also need to look at ensuring that the curriculum is very diverse, that it introduces both old knowledge and new knowledge. I worry, for example, if an education system makes no use of books, because print is considered old technology and electronic technology is seen as the only resource. I would like an education system that has a mix of technologies to it, because then when young people are innovative, they're innovative on a basis of a full set of technologies that have existed and are available to the world. We also need to ensure that we have continuous learning. Too many people believe once they've concluded their postgraduate degrees, it's enough, they've learned everything. And therefore, after a very short time, they become irrelevant. So the issue of continuous and lifelong learning is extremely important, and thus creating new opportunities for people to learn. And of course, we must learn beyond the classroom. If you confine learning to the classroom, you actually are giving young people very little opportunity. I also believe that we must prepare for the future in education. We're moving out of the industrial age. We're now in an age of free trade. We're in an age of information systems, an age of technological innovation, an age of the knowledge economy. Young people must be introduced to that framework of perspectives as they experience education. We should ensure that our universities and our schools become institutions of the future, and that they prepare young people to meet the needs of the future. So the question, I suppose, that this forum will help us to answer is, what is the future and how do we prepare for it? If we have young people ready to provide answers to those questions, I believe we as politicians and ministers would have done our jobs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for such informative report. К нам присоединился Дмитрий Викторович Ливанов. Не будет возражать, мы предоставим слово министру образования и науки России.
And now I want to give floor to our Ministry of Education and Science, Dmitry Livanov. Hello, dear friends. Thank you for the opportunity to come here. Today I met my colleague from the Republic of South Africa and my other colleague, the Minister of Science and Technology of China. And I realized that we indeed share the same vision and we have same goals and targets. Our countries are on the verge of technological breakthrough, and we should provide the same goal, the shared task and shared challenges, both in terms of science development, the promotion of higher education, everything that has to do with human capital, human resources, and innovation. In this regard, we are talking about forced transition in BRICS countries and in other countries have set this ambitious goal. So we talk about transition, about follow-up development, adoption of technologies from developed countries to the developing of the scientific potential on the ground in our countries. In this regard, the topic of translational science, the acceleration of knowledge transition from fundamental science to economy, is of utmost importance. We realize that in the 20th century, the distance, the gap between the discovery in fundamental science to the implementation of a ready-to-use project is getting narrow and narrow. That means we need new tools to manage human resource potential, new tools to develop human resource potential. We in Russia believe that this accelerated growth requires new priorities and better priority setting. And we have to stress on things that will shape the future of high-tech economy in the future. For Russia, we have three priorities. These are first, neurotechnologies, everything that has to do with brain research and, generally speaking, human health. Secondly, quantum technologies, including photonics and new materials. And thirdly, new production technologies. High-tech ways to produce things, including additive technologies and the technologies of fast prototyping, as they call it. In this regard, we, representing the Ministry of Science and Research, initiated 3 projects that, following the Nano initiative, the initiative on nanotechnologies. So these 3 initiatives are aimed to accelerate the pace of technology development in our country. Of course, not at the expense of fundamental technology development and research. Basically speaking, everything that has to do with the generation of breakthrough knowledge. All these projects assume interdisciplinary approach, the collaboration of different ministries, different industries and companies. These projects are important because they could be the driver for economic growth in the number of related industries. Let's take additive technologies as the example. We all know that they accelerate the pace of technological cycle at all the stages, from design and development to implementation and production of a new product. So here we talk about the personification of production in its true sense, as we moved from enormous computer system in the previous century to the personal computers, and we know how personal computers accelerated the pace of development. It's clear that we have to work closely with different ministries, institutions, our universities, academic community, and other related fields. And good collaboration between all the stakeholders is the key to the success of our projects. Just a couple of words on the efforts we have already taken and the measures we have already taken to strengthen the link between fundamental research and the real application of innovation in economic. First, we all evidenced the troubled change in our academia, in our academic science, and it narrowed down not just to the transfer of our institutions from the Academy of Science to the corresponding governmental body, the research center. We supported this project by adequate financing from the government and managed to raise unprecedented level of funding, unprecedented for our country. The decision was taken by the expert community and leading scientists, the decision on financing of research projects. We have developed new rules on financing scientists and introduced the amendments to the labor legislation, thus providing better financing for scientific staff, better rotation of scientific scientists, and thus enables better career prospects for young people, young professionals, and generally speaking, people who decided to work in science and for science. Secondly, we have started to establish zones or areas for technological advances. Almost all top world universities, the labs of fundamental and applied science are working, and as well as technological clusters, thus enabling the collaboration between sciences from all fields and promoting interdisciplinary approach, both with the involvement of students, PhD professionals, young professionals, and business community. We gain momentum and increase our scientific research and business capital. Just to give you a couple of statistics, Russian Statistics Service published the information on our innovative activity. And according to their data, according to their figures, we've seen the stable increase in innovative activity, even including the inflation rate. What's even more promising, the costs and the expenses on innovation have risen up to 20%. In precise figures, it's up to 75 million rubles. And we also see the rise of by 20% in the investment in fundamental science. That's a major improvement compared to 2013. It's clear that 2014 was a challenging year for us. I think 2015 will be more or less the same. It's troubled time for science, for innovation. But it's not just the challenge, it's also the perspective. That's the room for improvement. We see the picture clearly. We know where we have to improve. sometimes start from scratch, sometimes restart our innovation processes so that we could enable our technological independence in the key areas. We realized the importance of international student exchange, the transfer of human capital, the transfer of ideas. But in current circumstances, the issue of technological independence is of the highest priority for us. And major resources, both economic and human, will be invested into this problem. Our innovative businesses have major gaps to fill. They have good chances to start from scratch their production and enter Russian market with new production samples, with new products, basically. We also know the increasing importance of universities in terms of innovation and science. According to the International Library databases, in 2013, universities published about 62% of publications in Russian. If we take 2013, 60% of publications accounted for the scientists, for the academia, and now it's completely different. Students are getting increasingly involved, and their presence is increasing even in the international databases. Now the number of articles, papers published by the universities is much higher than the number of papers published by the Russian Academy of Science, just to give you the example. There is no doubt that the share of innovative products account for, so the institutions play major role in research and development in Russia, and they support our most important technological initiative. Here we have special regulation. Let's take government decrees number 218, 219, as well as decrees by the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Energy. So the government sector is also making important contribution to promote innovation in our country. We develop the centers of collective use, which were established on the premises of the universities. We established the labs of the international level. They were established by the government decree number 212. And we also provide financing for mega projects. Let's take the reactor in Gachina, the so-called nucleatron in Dubna, and some other mega projects which are currently being implemented in our country, and they are also financed by the government. We have established numerous centers in our technical universities. They have an umbrella named engineering centers, but they cover all sorts of issues: clinical research, medical research, information and data processing, information technologies, and we expand access to international databases from our universities. So almost all our universities have full access to the international libraries, to the international database, for them to get a full picture of what's going on in the world in their field. Once again, the challenges we are facing today in our country bring not just difficulties, not just risks, but also the opportunities. And to tap these opportunities, to transfer risks into opportunities. To do that, we have to invest in infrastructure, to build eco-infrastructure, which is a prerequisite for innovative economy. Thank you so much.
I thank you very much, distinguished minister. If someone has any comments. Yes, I would like to comment briefly. It turns out that it's quite fashionable recently to, contrapose Russian Academy of Science and higher educational institutions. I don't think that makes much sense. If you have a look at China, that made a huge breakthrough in fundamental sciences and increased the number of publications by 500%. The main base for that was Chinese Academy of Science, which is an exact copy of Russian Academy of Science. Russian Academy of Science accounts for 17% of all the science, and it produces about 75% of all the scientific publications. These are statistical figures, and we can't really talk about, any competitiveness between the Russian Academy of Science and Russian higher educational institutions. During the last few years, Russian Academy of Science didn't get any additional funding, and higher educational institutions got a lot of it. And I just wanted to state that for you to understand the situation better. Yes, please. Questions. Professor Figovsky, Israel, United States. I have a question to distinguished minister. You were quite right to say that a lot has been done to develop higher educational institutions, and technical innovations account for technical higher educational institutions. But as a foreign specialist, I had to deal with the very strange rules of your ministry. When you decide whom to get funding, you base that decision on the quotation index. But what does that mean? That means that if you want to look great, you have to publish articles. But this is not right for technical sciences. In technical sciences, you have to protect a patent. In any database, in web science, anywhere, the links to the patents do not count as a quotation in the quotation index. And I just wanted to understand why this is not reflected in the requirements for grants in your ministry, because the patent is the most important here for technical sciences. In any European system, the priority is not the reference, not the citation index, it's patent numbered. I tried to, calculate my success here in Russia, and it turns out that I almost, the number of my patents was much higher than the quotation index. So I wouldn't get any grant here in Russia. I couldn't agree more, but we have to understand that the science is multifaceted. Some of scientists do publications, some of scientists do practical researches, and only researchers and scientists themselves have the right to appreciate their publications, and those of them who are interested in their colleagues' works are the best proof that these other scientists are successful. But of course we try to calculate, and we pay a lot of attention to the patents, and of course there is not a problem in this sphere. There are different types of grants and there are different types of financial support. This is not the only one way to qualify, to calculate the qualification of the participant. I mean, the citation index is not the only one tool. We try to, appreciate it from every possible point of view. Of course, if we speak about technical sciences, we also calculate and we appreciate the patent activity of the participant. We just have to, start from the different ways of financing. I have a question to Dmitry Viktorovich and Vladimir Evgenich. My name is Rappaport Viktor. China is our partner for our innovational forum and a new perspective sphere for collaboration. The Russian Academy of Science for many years had a program of exchange of scientists between Russian and Chinese Academy of Science, and I wonder whether this program will continue to exist in the following years, and who am I to contact about this, because usually October was a deadline for application for such of exchange. Yes, this program does exist. We recently talked with our Chinese colleagues, and you have to apply to the Presidium of the Academy of Science. And we got quite a similar impulse from the Academy of Science of the United States of America. In a couple of weeks, or probably maximum 4 weeks, we will welcome here the American team, and we'll discuss the same program with our American colleagues. And we don't see any reasons to annulate the contacts that we had with the leading scientists, despite any sanctions and any circumstances. And they have a very similar opinion on that. Sergei Mardamov, Russian venture company. My question is to both of you. Going to the initial topic of this panel discussion, how does Academy of Science, together with the Ministry of Education and higher educational institutions, can realize and implement some projects that aim to transfer technologies, and possibly we will create some joint transfer offices, some joint transferring projects, and do that together. I have an answer to that. On behalf of the Ministry of Education and Science, we are responsible for all the science in all the Russian Federation. And we don't really make any distinction between the science of ministry, the science of Academy of Science. Our goal is to create prerequisites for any scientist that has bright ideas. Our goal is to provide him or her with support. Yes, we create offices of transfer of the technologies as engineering centers. We have a patent office. Another tool is we do our best to create a favorable environment, innovative environment. We try to cut all the barriers for the transfer of the innovation from the scientific sphere to the economic sphere. And most importantly, we do that involving young people in the innovative sphere, because the one who is actually carrying the innovation is a human being, and considering all the improvements, all the innovations, we have to involve more and more young people. This is a natural human way of transferring the technologies that is proven to be the best all over the world. Of course, we can transfer paper, we can transfer, documents, but I think the best way, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one that believes in that the best way to transfer the information and the innovation is a human. And I'm not talking about any materials, I'm just talking about the way of thinking, the way of acting, the way of creating some new things. This very important innovative culture will come from our leading educational institutions, first and foremost technical and R&D institutions, of course, and it will come to Russian companies. Briefly, the last question. I'm not original. Another question to distinguished minister. Do you do any work to appreciate, to calculate the competitiveness of Russian production? Not, I don't mean here calculating the amount of money spent to science, but some effectiveness, and productivity. It's quite a tough job to appreciate the effectiveness of one's work. I guess that every company or any production site has its own metrics, and I think here the main measurement is the market itself. If the company is growing faster than its competitors in existing competitive environment, that means it's working pretty well. If it's some kind of monopoly, it's not interested in innovations. We all understand it's kind of a trap that shows itself in our real business circumstances. Just a continuation of your answer. In automobile production, we suffer from the scale deficit, and any know-how doesn't have any perspective because we can't really compete with Bosch, for example. In aviation, in the defense industry, we suffer from archaic structure of the industry. The productiveness, the effectiveness is much lower. So what are we actually talking about? How do we implement it? What's the model of the competitiveness? Because everything we do in applied science, we do for the sake of competitiveness of our machinery. We see that many spheres require restructurization, and in living this globalization, how do we compete? If you expect some kind of universal answer from me, I am not sure it actually exists, and I don't think you'll find it. Basing on the world experience, we know that the stimulus for innovation is competitiveness. Only the company that has to compete with others is really motivated to occupy new markets, is really motivated to develop. That's why I believe the creation of this type of economic environment is our main goal. It's number one in the agenda of innovative development. Of course, it is different from country to country. We can produce automobiles basing on the domestic market, but we can't, produce airplanes for domestic market only. It's international industry, so the demands are quite high. We have to make a very strict industry analysis. Thank you very much. We are going out of time a little bit, and now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Klepic, the Vice President of the National Bank. This is the very company that supports a lot of innovative projects. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I would like to start not with the innovations in the sense of Institute of the Development, but with something similar. A lot of innovations that we're talking about that are actually creating the image of the industry all over the world, they have in their essence the fundamental discoveries made, I believe, in the first half of the 20th century. And in this sense, I think we are now at the edge of the new wave of fundamental discoveries. What does that mean? That means that before talking about innovations entering the market, we have to create prerequisites for the breakthrough of fundamental science. We have to create the environment for the development of fundamental science, and fundamental science that we use in military and defense sector. We are facing many problems in laser, quantum, composite materials, technologies. We are actually experiencing a lot of fundamental problems, and we have to continue researches in this sphere, and we still are missing many answers. So I believe this is what we have to start with. It's not really the creation of new innovative system, but also the creation of very, heavy and very solid fundamental base that will help us to realize in 100% and in more effective way the whole innovative potential that we have. As our minister, distinguished minister, has already said, we do spend a lot on R&D, but if we compare that with GDP, unfortunately, it's nothing in comparison with the level of inflation. During last 5 or 7 years, the R&D expenses are in the state of stagnation, actually. It's about 1.1% or 1.13%, something like that. And it's exactly the same for some last years. In comparison, China increased the R&D expenses from 1 to 1.8%. If we generally all over the world, it's about 2% from GDP. If we remember Soviet times, it was about 3%. So one of our main goals is increase R&D funding. And well, speaking about planning of the budget for the future years, unfortunately, we'll have to cut those expenses and not to increase them. This is the circumstances we're living in, and we can't really do much about it. Though it depends a lot on forecasting, and if we forecast better, we could probably do something about that. We were saying that we have to find the missing chain that will help us to transfer this innovation to economy. And we remembered even the plenary session of the Central Committee of the Soviet Union. But what distinguished minister said, we have a list of critical technologies. We have some technological priorities that are reflected in a whole list of program documents. But what is really important, the Ministry of Education and Science is always saying that this is not only their job, this is the job of a lot of different institutions. New quantum technologies, new industrial technologies, and some additive technologies, 3D integrations, a whole wide spectrum of knowledge. And it's medical technologies, not only neuro, but also nuclear technologies and etc., some new diagnostic methods. This is all very important. And here we see the creation of the whole new sphere. This is not purely innovation. This is also about fundamental science. These are also breakthrough technological developments. Mr. Grigoriev told us from the point of view of Foundation for Advanced Research, from the point of view of existing programs, these are applied technologies that the industry can already use. Some Web Institute for Development, other institutes, all these participants of this huge and very important process have to work on equal level. Of course, this Web Institute will continue work with this existing project, not only from the point of view of traditional bank risks, but like security criteria, but first and foremost from the point of view of how these projects will help to realize and implement that scientific initiative. This is what Mr. Livanov was saying. How will this help to realize our potential in practice? So I believe this project work is what we've been always doing in our bank, but we are now rethinking it, and we are now looking for new projects that would help us to realize these scientific and technological initiatives. Probably we'll do that together with some other institutes as a fund for prospective researchers, for advanced researchers, as a Russian Foundation for Scientific Research that I know that the ministry is planning to restructure drastically. And I believe that this cooperation will help us to make a huge step forward. And another thing that I would like to mention, our bank is multifaceted organization, and there is an innovative part in it. We have an agreement with Skolkovo Fund, and we would like to make some amendments to that agreement to make it wider and to make it a certain stimulus and the driver for the developments of Russian Academy of Science, so that those ideas would transfer in innovative product and innovative projects. This work has started already, and if I'm not mistaken, there are about 6 portfolios already. And I believe that having that analytical support and solving all those decapitalization problems together with Russian Academy of Science, we could become this innovative driver. We have another innovative project office that started cooperation with the Russian Academy of Science. And this is a very important work on counseling of the project. But unfortunately, or probably luckily, there is not a single solution. But we have at our disposal a whole set of different tools that together with the Russian Academy of Science, we believe we could use really effectively. So this innovative idea and this idea of the interconnection of innovation with the competitiveness is very important for us. But I believe that this competitiveness depends on our level of cooperation. So the best thing to do from our point of view is cooperate at the best level and, well, to do our best. Thank you very much.
Just a small remark. The agreements are have actually been signed between the bank and the Center for Innovation, so they are already in place. Now I want to give floor to Mr. Lapidus, but I kindly ask him to stick to the schedule, and he has 5 minutes for his speech. Thank you so much, distinguished colleagues. I'd like to start off from the issue the guy from the audience asked about how to narrow the gap between the fundamental science to the real economy and real implementation. I think that one of the tasks we have in this regard is the dialogue, establishing the dialogue and the exchange between fundamental science and practitioners. Only collaboration of these stakeholders enables us to cut this long path. That is why we have established the Joint Scientific Council involving major field research institutions, 4 of them. We have there 9 institutions of other fields, and this council is participated by 9 academics and 4 corresponding members, where we discuss the most relevant issues of the military, defense sector, and other related issues. That's where we produce the results through which we can increase the effectiveness of the research, and for decision makers, for strategy implementation stakeholders, for them we give the tools to understand what things they can use to increase the effectiveness of transport and other infrastructure. We have a lot to do up to 2013 according to the strategy proposed by the Ministry of Russian Federation. We have to increase the capacity of Russian railroads by 2-fold, and we have to increase the actual capacity of our trains. For that, we need new technologies, new transport, new materials that will reduce costs and increase effectiveness. We already have samples in hand, including gas turbines and locomotive with gas turbines with capacity up to 9,000 tons. We have developed one of the first energy installation using energy elements for Buran spaceship, And on the premises of this forum, we have already discussed with the Institute of Physics and other institutes. We have discussed with them the issue of designing and developing the new locomotive with new energy elements. We have to, once again, we have to cut costs, increase effectiveness of our transport. We are facing enormous competition, tremendous competition, and to stay competitive, we have to collaborate with our counterparts from overseas, and we are quite high in the international rating on this term. We collaborate with the Railroad Council of the International Railroad Association, comprising more than 160 countries and more than 300 companies from all over the world. This information exchange, the exchange of best practices between different stakeholders, decision makers, scientists, that's the way for us. That's the path from fundamental science to its rapid implementation in practice. Thank you, Boris, and let us give floor for concluding remarks to our colleague from Brazil.
Thank you very much. It seems that I will be the only one talking about translation, in fact. I work for Instituto Butantan. Butantan is founded in 1901, the merge of three different institutes that dealt with vaccines and hyperimmune serum, and the oldest one dates back to 1832. So we have 160 years in experience in doing science and manufacturing things. Either be vaccines, either be hyperimmune serum, or be it bioproducts. For instance, we make lung surfactants since 1984. But I'd like to tell you in simple ideas what happens in this case of how to take knowledge from the science lab to the factory. We have 35 science labs, and we have 6 vaccine factories, 1 plasma fractioning, and 6 biotech factories in the same campus operated by us. And all these factories work with our technology, and technology that came out from the labs. Sometimes it was quite traumatic. For instance, in 1975, Brazil had a meningitis epidemics that was censored. It was a military right-wing government then, but we managed to build a factory and develop the vaccine in 6 months. Of course, it cannot be done today. It takes almost 10 years, but it's still possible. And what have we learned from all those years and doing research and operating? Well, the first thing is a scientist is a scientist. Do not try to make a scientist a businessman. It doesn't work, and it's a waste of a good scientist. You have to send someone from time to the lab to check out what they are doing and make the relevant questions. And when you find out something interesting, you just check if it's time to take that research out of the lab and say it's no longer research, it's something else. And this something else receives a different treatment because it's no longer research. Most of the scientists do not like this part. When you go there and tell him, look, this is no longer your son, your research son. This is something else. But you need a guy to do that. And we are using now a couple of guys. One guy that is more the management economist, mind that deals with numbers and has a background in some science, but not too much, to run the numbers. And the other guy is more like a mix of scientist and engineer. And he goes there and he looks at that and he talks to the scientists. And sometimes you have to make questions to the scientists. I give you one example. There is a stingray in the Amazon that has a venom that is not biological. It's vegetable. It's something new. Now, people thought that it may be lipids or something like that, but it's not. It's something vegetable. Okay, it opens for you a big frontier of possibilities. If you find out how this stingray poisons your body, you can use the active principle from the whole Amazon and other biosystems to work in the benefit of medicine and maybe replace all the chemical-based medicines that there is. So that's something that you may have to study and check in depth. And that's something that is related to the research. So let the guy do the research, go to there from time to time, check what he's doing, take something out, and then what you have to do with that something out. In biotech is much more complicated than something like an iPhone or a machine gun or a rocket or something that you could see. Because the guy that is interested in that product, usually he can see a factory when you show him the product. Look, I have developed a new brake for a high-speed train. That is something that the guy that manufactures trains understand. But when you go to a businessman and tell him, look, I have a new molecule that has the same property as an analgesic, but it's not, it does not create dependency like the common opiaceums. That is something that he does not understand, because he cannot imagine the factory behind himself. So the point with biotech is that you have to convince the businessman that he should see a factory with the product that you have. And then you have to spend something like 10 years in finishing the research. Take, for instance, this kind of a molecule that was engineered from the Crotalus venom that does have that analgesic property. Okay, you engineer the molecule and all that, but that molecule is not properly fine-tuned to be produced in a factory. So you have to work something that demands computational chemistry, quantum physics, and all that to, for instance, extract a carbon from the molecule or something like that. That's a real case. And when that is ready, you have to go to pre-trial clinicals, clinical trials, phase 1, 2, and 3. There's a lot of problems with that. For instance, if I wanted to develop the hepatitis C vaccine, the law says that you have to make the trials with animals. You start with mice, and usually you go ahead with monkeys. But monkeys don't take hepatitis C. So the regulators don't know what to do, and they don't help you. It will take 4 or 5 years of discussions around the world until someone says, okay, if the monkeys don't take hepatitis C test, make the test in humans. But it's not possible in the actual configuration. Since we have a lot of ministers here, I would ask the ministers to think about this regulatory system that was very good for chemical-based medicine or pharmacy, but it's not a good system for biotech products. Biotech has other characteristics that may demand different regulatory conditions than a simple copy and paste of chemical-based medicine. So what are the main problems? Regulatory issues, businessmen, and I will stay with only 3 things. I had more here. Is indebtedness. If you start a company with a big debt, be it with the bank, with development bank, with someone, this is not a good start. We faced for a long time hyperinflation in Brazil. We had inflation of 80% a month for years. It was not a national disaster, but it was very bad. And inflation taught us that debt is not a good thing with high or low inflation. So if you are thinking about stimulating startups and all that, maybe have a startup with a big debt, this is not a good thing to do. If you check the Americans with their venture capital, the venture capital is not someone that finances, it's someone that puts capital. And so the companies start with very low or no debt. That's an interesting thing. Let me see.
Mr. Loyola, we're slightly running out of time.
Yes, I'll stay here.
All right.
I think that's enough.
Thank you indeed. Ну, в завершение я хотел бы...
In the end, I want to thank all the participants of our panel discussion. If there are any questions, you can ask them informally in the hall of the forum, and that's where we close our panel discussion. Thank you so much.